Hello, welcome to Digital Influence. Today I've got the pleasure of interviewing Aisha Khan, who is a graphic designer by trade and has niched down to a very interesting area. And she's got a great message for people who are interested in property development. Let's have a chat to Aisha and learn a bit more about her unique approach to branding for what's quite a specialised and high-value service area. Welcome, Aisha. Thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good, Dallas, and thanks for having me today.
Pleasure, pleasure. So yeah, tell us a bit more about what you do. I'd love to hear your background and also what you're doing now.
Okay, so my background from far, far away, I used to work in the humanitarian industry and then compliance, all as project officer work. Then I decided, look, I love the creative fields and I always have, and that I really wanted to go into it and make a concerted effort to not only create really beautiful works and beautiful products which actually help my customers, but then also on the side to keep that creativity for myself personally. So it's that beautiful balance. And at the moment, especially with the particular business program, accelerator program I'm doing, it's really helped me to be clear on what I'm doing in terms of a very specific niche. And I've got a bit of history with this niche, and but basically I've gone into identity branding and the graphic design side and telling the story of property developments, properties which are to be sold that exist, and also for property developers themselves, their story, and some boutique real estate agents. So sort of in that property area, and it's about bringing a brand identity which really shows what a particular building is, what it represents, and what it represents in terms of the story of it and the lifestyle if somebody wishes to then go ahead and purchase it, and the sort of lifestyle that they will have in it. Because I feel it's about growing communities, and in today's world with a lot of property developments, it is about creating smaller central hubs of communities in existing community areas and really building up areas in that way. So it's more turning towards that lifestyle and not just this is brick and mortar house. So yeah.
Terrific, terrific. And that's really a great way for developers to differentiate themselves too, because really when you buy a property, at least if you're an owner-occupier, it is a lifestyle that you're buying into. And really, one apartment's much the same as the next, but that shared vision of what the property represents is going to attract like-minded occupiers, and really set the bar for what the lifestyle on offer is. So great approach. You mentioned your sort of brand accelerator program you're doing. You're involved in the Key Personal Influence program, which I finished up last year, and we really met at your pitch day, didn't we? So it was quite early for you then. You've come a long way in terms of developing a method that really draws in on your own background, both as a designer, but then the property industry experience you've had. So tell us a little bit about how you sort of discovered what your niche was, because when I first spoke to you, you're a bit confused in spite of having got a good start on your business, Studio Rebrand. You hadn't really niched down, and so I think it's fascinating the way you've discovered an area to focus on where you can add a lot of value. Tell us more about that.
Okay, so the whole property side, how do I explain? I feel that things like finance and property investment, or investment in general, is not something that is taught in school, and I actually think that's a fallacy. People should know about these things and not treat it as a mystery, and treat it as they are projects. I've been very lucky to have a wonderful father who has been able to communicate ideas subtly over the years. And a few years ago, I purchased my first unit and renovated it and sold it here in Brisbane in New Farm. And my next choices were, what was I going to do? Just do it as a one-off and pretend that this form of investment doesn't exist and it's a scary thing. It's something that younger people shouldn't be a part of. That all of this stigma about really building wealth in in your own very subtle, you know, it's a long-term thing. It's not something, you don't become a millionaire overnight. It takes a long time and it's concerted effort. But I thought, look, you know, we have to enjoy it. And yeah, and the project side behind it, because I've been doing project work for so many years, it's actually quite enjoyable to do the research, property areas, that sort of, you know, research, look at the data, and you have to do your due diligence. And then once you do go onto a particular project, it's like running a proper project. So you're working with council, with developers, with builders, depending what you're doing as well, and your own strategy. You have to have your strategy down pat. And then this property side, which I'm sort of working on with other property projects very slowly at the moment, it really came in quite clearly with my graphic design work, because of course creating beautiful things is what every artistic or creative person wants to do, and they realistically, you just want to sit and do great art and everything all day long. But then you do have to find that balance. You have to find that balance between creating products, services which actually help a particular group, and do a good job, you know, and is outcome based. So yeah, and then I thought, look, property, I've got the ongoing interest with it. I know a little bit about it. I know a little bit about the marketing and the accounting and how to do that from that side. So I thought, look, with my brand identity work, I'll just marry them all together. So that's sort of where it's come. And yes, I've come a long way in terms of finding a niche and finding one that I was very comfortable with as well. So yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, it sounds like you can add a lot of value. And you know, while people often think of branding as being, you know, just a pretty logo, really there is a lot more organisation to it in terms of working out a whole brand identity and looking at how an organisation is going to apply that. So there is a fair bit of discipline to doing it well once you start dealing with corporate clients, rather than just coming up with a logo on its own. It really does need to be part of a broader sort of brand identity, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you have to work across different mediums, depending on what the project is, but generally you're going to be doing print and web. You also could be doing things such as signage. So materials are also very important. What looks good on the screen, when you're actually translating that onto a printed material surface, which then, you know, for example, a sign which will be outside in the wind and the rain, that sort of a, you know, and in the sun, you really do have to find out what's going to work in terms of the material practice, in terms of the logo and the colors, and the patterns, if they actually look, you know, they might look good on the screen of your beautiful computer, but they might not actually translate too well into the real world, which, you know, that's all very important, including keeping a very strong, like a style guide, a very strong brand guidelines, because you don't want to go off brand. For example, if Ray White, you know, their colors are that cadmium yellow, grey, white and black. And if their yellow turned out in a print advertisement more like something that's orange, people would literally say, is this a Ray White advertisement or is this something else? And then they lose brand trust. And yeah, it sort of makes it a very difficult situation for both that company and then the people who would initially have purchased from them. So yeah, so you have to have a strong brand identity, and you have to keep it strong across all mediums, which of course style guides, and then also understanding the material that's being used. Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, well, of course we have the same thing on the web, and it's a big issue because often in terms of building the brand, you end up using lots of different online modalities. You might have your website and social media and other advertising on websites or social channels, and get a lot of it's just about congruency. People often worry a lot about their brand and sometimes overthink it. You know, a good strong logo is really important, but for someone starting out, even that's not necessarily as important as just being consistent and congruent, so that people have a universal experience of your brand across different channels, rather than it sort of being back and forth. So what tips can you give us for someone who is is getting started with their branding, because you've worked quite a lot with startups and entrepreneurs, as well as this work you're doing with sort of larger development firms. What are the first things people should look for in terms of developing their brand, and how can they take the next step to work with a designer?
Well, it's interesting because, for example, something such as property is, both also on the social media, because property enters into that quite a lot nowadays. It's that brand consistency has to stay as strong as literally the bricks and mortar of the actual building or property which is being sold. If I'm guessing with entrepreneurs and startups, it's obviously a different space altogether. And, a lot of startups I know have gone through a lot of iterations, a lot of changes in their brand as they've pivoted, as they've changed their products, as they've gone through those sorts of changes. So a brand like that, if you're very clear with your style guide, which your style guide is, it's your core of your brand identity. And if it's very clear, if it's very simple, and also if it explains very clearly how to, this particular margin for this Facebook banner, this is where the logo would go on your Twitter account feed, very, very clear. So almost just practical. If it's just practical and says exactly how to handle that particular piece of design element of brand collateral in that particular platform or situation, then it's wonderful. And if you need to go through a change, then it's a lot easier to be able to negotiate that change with a designer. Or if you literally are going through a major pivot, you can just do that. But you need to have that very clear set of a brand Bible, a style guide, whatever you want to call it. But it has to be very specific. You have to have the CMYK, the hex value, RGB values. You have to know exactly what it is that your brand is. It's, the meat and the bones. And then you can go through changes. You can go through them slowly. If you're gradually changing your product, or if you are a leaner startup, you can go through a total change in, however fast you can try to get it done. And yeah, it really comes back to having a really strong core brand identity, which you can either work with as it exists, or you can just rebuild a brand new one. It really depends where your business is going. So that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, great. And really it touches on the issue that a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs face, where they think they've had some branding done and they really got as far as a logo, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of thought that went into how that's going to be used or what it's actually supposed to be saying. So it's probably important to really get that message out there that branding is more than just artwork and pretty pictures and colours, that you're hoping to evoke a response, to say something about the brand, about its character, and also to help differentiate the brand. So you want it to be really appropriate for the industry, but really to stand out as well, so there's no risk of it being mistaken or forgotten. What can you tell us about that process that you go through in the lead up to actually coming up with the creative aspects?
Okay, so we at Studio Rebrand, we actually have what's called the brand methodology, and it works with a principle and a process. So the process is, I've named it, or it's been named brand. So essentially you brief and you learn about the particular client, where they're at. You gain a degree of clarity about who they are, their story, their direction, and there's a little bit of an audit involved there. So you actually audit their brand collateral, their goals, their visions, all of those sorts of aspects, because you can't really, you could design something if you wanted without knowing this information, but it's going to be completely off topic. You're going to miss the mark entirely. So you have to understand. So brief and gain some clarity, and then secondly, we recommend a series of designs. We've gone back to the drawing board and we've sketched up quite a lot of ideas. We've done a lot of research with competitors and just also the market taste what the market is really wanting out of that particular, business that we're working with. And we also pick up a little bit of that business's culture, and we recommend sort of designs, elements and collateral which will suit not only what their market needs, but also what their culture is. So that has to connect. Then we go through the approval process. That's the A in brand. And the approval process is sketching out the details, of course, the first briefs, if they're happy with that particular design style, and just looking at details a little bit more. And it sort of starts to really come together in that approval process. And at times, it also creates a little bit more extra clarity for the client, which that can happen as well, and they can become a bit more clear on where they're coming from. And there's a lot of creativity that's involved in this process, because that's where we really do some more sort of deeper drilling down into that creative side of how to really, how to communicate that design element across different, mediums. And then we'll go to navigating, which is the N. So we're just navigating the launch, the preparation, the design, pushing the designs and the elements across the different mediums, and just basically working on that. There's a bit of negotiation that comes through, and that's all part of the process. And the biggest point with this navigation is consistency. So you have to maintain consistency, and that is obviously the style guide or the brand Bible, however you want to call it. That's what's supposed to really keep it all together. And we also have to make sure that everyone in that business are referring to that particular document, so that it's an alive document, it's a living document, and it doesn't just get filed away into the computer or something after it's been created. So it's very important that that business works with that. And finally, we do deliver. So we, if there's been a website that's been created for a particular property, so we've delivered the website, obviously the brand elements, if there's print involved, signage, things like that. So that's delivered, and that also creates that credibility, not just for us, obviously we have to deliver a project, but credibility for that business, that they have a full follow through of their design, their identity, and who they are, as well as what their product is, which in this case is property development. So it's the brand methodology: brief, recommend, approve, navigate, and deliver.
Sounds terrific. And one thing I often get asked is, what if you have multiple sort of sub-brands or product or project brands under a parent company or organisation? Do you have specific processes for dealing with those, or do you have general thoughts for someone who might have started a business and then thinking about branching out and starting a new business, or perhaps building more of a personal brand? Just any general tips on how to put them together, because that's a really common problem. Often it's simpler when you've got one business and that's it, but when you start getting a portfolio or starting a new venture, it can be, that's a risk to sort of brand integrity. You can distract customers. So what do you say about that?
It's interesting. There's quite a few examples of master brands and umbrella brands and sub brands. Examples of businesses that have gone through rebranding to either branch out further with their different offerings and their different fingers in the pies, or to really consolidate who they are if they've kind of lost a bit of that, who are we? We do this, we do that, we do everything else. Coffee International, that is a large engineering and development group, and they went through a rebrand, which they had quite a few divisions, and so they had engineering, they had aid and development, they had education, a few different areas there. And they'd actually lost their brand consistency or coherence because they had so many different directions that they were going into. So they went through a rebrand, which essentially brought all of those particular groups and divisions back under a main, master umbrella brand. And then, say, for example, in their particular brand collateral, they used different colors, slightly different shapes, and just then the name of the division to differentiate those divisions, but they all had exactly the same color schemes, but with the dominant color is slightly different, and the same shapes, but with the dominant shape for that particular division. So it was brought back under this strong umbrella of the Coffee International brand. So that there's a few different ways to do that. Otherwise, some brands, they actually completely disassociate their brand with, or their main core business with sub-brands. So GlaxoSmithKline, it's such a large corporation, but then they don't particularly put their actual logo onto, their McLean's, toothpaste. They're totally different things, and you wouldn't even connect the two businesses together. So, but it turns out that's the master owning business, and then that's another division or another business which is branded completely differently. So there are a few different ways to handle it. And if you have products can be branded completely differently, and they might not have anything to do with the master brand, because also products go through a faster brand life cycle, and products are easier to sort of develop, test on the market, and then if they either fail or if they need a bit of tweaking, they can sort of go through that. So it actually really depends on your business structure, who you are, what you do, where you're planning to go. That entirely illustrates the direction you're going to go with how to handle your brand, your master brand, your sub-brands, or if you're going to keep them completely different. It really depends on your structure. So I highly recommend you go and have a look at your structure and how you want to promote yourself first, and then talk to a designer or a brand group that's very good with that sort of structural branding, and then you can sort of work out ways in which to take it. But yeah, it's quite complex actually, so it depends on the business.
Yeah, and it does get more formal than sitting around with a computer pushing a few pixels around, as people often think. The example of GlaxoSmithKline is a good one in that often these bigger brands, they're not necessarily creating new products to extend it to new markets, but almost to compete against themselves in existing markets. So they might have a sort of budget, middle and top level brand of basically the same product, but are distinctly branded on purpose as being different to appeal to different niches, but really rely on the same type of thing from the same person. So
pretty much. So it really, that is that, you have to see the branding difference. And then of course, when you come with products, is the product any different, and how is the product itself differentiated? So that's a different set of questions altogether.
Yeah, but, absolutely. It is really strong strategy recently that we've seen things like supermarkets all the time where, brands are coming out with multiple products that are actually almost identical. My favourite example, maybe it's the cynic in me, is Nurofen. They've got Nurofen for back pain, Nurofen for headaches, and various other products, and they're all literally exactly the same, with the same packaging with a different colour and different words. And they've been registered for a specific product, so they've got a legal reason that they can claim this. But really, it's just about grabbing market share and also getting more specific in the messaging to say, hey, headache, this is the one you should have, rather than the competitor generic product. So slightly cynical, but that is, it's applying those lessons of branding to be targeted toward a niche rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
And you're actually quite right, and that does come down to that particular business and that business structure. In my personal opinion, for me, a brand really is that story as to what it is, and I think you really have to back up what you're doing and your brand. When you're talking about these different, Nurofen, and there's different types, but they're pretty much the same. I would say it's a different way of using branding. I wouldn't agree with it personally, because in my opinion, if you've got a product or a service, or if there's something about you that you want to bring out to the world and give something there, whatever it is or whatever business you're in, essentially a brand it's a reflection of who you are or your business offering, that sort of a thing. It's also a reflection of what the market wants. And then it's also the chariot which carries you and your business offering to other people and to be recognized. So it is interesting with branding. It does then depend, I think, on the intentions of the business. So
Yes.
again, if you make yourself intentional, if you show your story and why you're doing what you're doing, then you don't fall into that trap of passing, pretty much the same brands off as each other, and yeah, which is a completely different way to handle branding. So yeah, it's the dark side.
Yes. So storytelling is a really important part of branding, and it again is a great opportunity to differentiate where you've got a relatively crowded market with similar products. We do tend to pick up on these sort of narratives or archetypes behind specific brands. I've often been fascinated with sort of brand naming. That's something people often overthink or struggle with, but it can have a real impact if it's done right. If we think of some of the big brands, and often you're sort of tapping into existing associations or hopefully positive for the brand, and leveraging them so that you've got an immediate sort of point of recognition for the brand where otherwise there might not be one. How do you encourage people to develop that brand story as they're working on their brand and sort of incorporate it into the customer journey?
It's interesting. For me, I'm still learning myself. It's funny, you can say to people what's a good idea, but to actually do it for yourself, it's very interesting. I'm learning to put my own story behind what I'm doing. But essentially, everyone loves a story. I think from a cultural perspective, across the world, you're never going to find a place where people don't want to hear a story. They don't, everyone wants to know a little something interesting, what's going on. So if you really can sit down and produce a story from what your personal experiences are, the experiences that you've had with your business, with anything else. You might have some elements from, you might turn out to be on the side of a very good banjo player, and that might have nothing to do with your actual business, but you might have a moment when you've reached a particular audience or you've met someone at a meeting and they mention how much they love banjo playing, and somehow you can find that connection and bring that story into what you do. It sounds a bit vague, but it's interesting. There are elements about your life which are going to be interesting, or your business, which are going to be interesting to people. And if you bring that human element, the case studies, somebody that you've helped and they happen to be a banjo player, then you can connect it through. And then the Banjo Playing Association of somewhere might say, oh, you've worked with so-and-so, and oh, that's fantastic. So again, stories are woven, and you can really create some beautiful stories from what you already have, and people that you've worked with, and little incidental things that have happened. So I think the stories are really, really important. For example, in property, the story of what you are going to have in terms of a lifestyle if you decide to live in this particular property, that has to be sort of explained or told as a story. Oh, you're close to a nature reserve. There's fishing around the corner, or there's beautiful cafes downstairs, which on a Sunday morning you can sit and read your newspaper, or your friends can come and have a coffee. And so you illustrate that story with these different elements, which not everyone would be interested in fishing, but then not everyone would be interested in just sitting in a cafe. So you have to really find what story suits that particular product or your business. And it's all, I think most things are story driven. And then if you've got beautiful visuals and other things to sort of illustrate that quite literally, it really helps. So yeah, so stories are important.
Yeah, totally. I'm absolutely convinced of the role of stories in branding, marketing and sales. They do some really interesting things, just the way our brain responds, because we often imagine that we purchase things based on analytical reasoning, but in practice, from brain scan studies, they've shown that the decision is made by the emotional part of our brain, not the rational part of our brain. The rational part of the brain just explains it and takes credit for it afterward, and that emotional part of our brain, it plugs into the stories, and you can do some very interesting things with story, where you can contract and expand time, or you can give someone an experience merely by taking them on that journey through storytelling. So the opportunity for them to imagine an outcome that they haven't yet got, through hearing the outcome that someone just like them, who they connect with, has experienced, is really powerful. And the visual side of branding and the other creative elements that we draw into branding can support that and make it richer and more tangible and memorable. So definitely a huge role for storytelling and smart branding to play into that.
I absolutely agree. And a good story behind who you are as a business and what you do, I mean, that really does make, as you've just said, it makes the difference between somebody choosing to go with you as compared with somebody else, or a near competitor, something like that. It does make that difference.
For sure. So what type of businesses do you generally work with the Studio Rebrand, Aisha? If I was a developer, I'm thinking, oh, gee, maybe it sounds pretty interesting. How do I know that you're the right person for me to come to? What size organisations? What stage in the planning process should I be getting in touch?
It's interesting. Ideally, you would love to be part of the brand identity design from the moment that the architect or the draftsperson, the architect, starts putting the first sketches down. I think that's in an ideal world. Then you can really actually build the brand identity with the actual brick and mortar building. But generally, that will come in once the building has started to be built, or at least you've got the development application that's been approved, and then the building application for the property. If this is a development, a new development, usually by that stage, there's the thoughts, okay, we're going to go and contact creative agencies or groups that will be able to do this. So it actually depends on whether it is a brand new development. It depends whether it's an existing building which has been either modified or refreshed, or if it is a building that there's just, they'd like to sell it, and it just is what it is, and what is the story behind it. So it does depend. There's quite a few developers which are family orientated or family operated developers. So there are some families, they go in and create development groups from that. There are smaller property developers where they've gone into business with a few other key partners, and they're working together, with their office, and they'll generally be working on a specific type of property, a specific type of strategy they'll have, and then of course you start getting larger or medium-sized property developers. Some can be branches from larger organisations or corporations. And of course, the government as well does property developments in its, its development areas. So it's economic growth in particular regions of Australia. So it really does depend on that particular property developer. Some of them are going through a slight change. Some are growing and creating large sort of art departments, design departments, which work closely inside the organisation. Others are actually contracting and deciding that they will contract out some of their design work. So it very much depends on that particular business and what their strategy is, the sort of developments or the sort of property that they work in, and then that does inform who they work with. But ideally, you'd like to have it from the very start, from the architectural side, but that's an ideal world, so it doesn't really happen at that stage.
Terrific. And I suppose working in conjunction with architects and planners and other professionals is a good opportunity for you to get in early, rather than waiting for that last minute when they think, oh, hang on, I've got to keep the print ads, we've better come up with a brand.
Yeah, so it's much better if you really know who your market is when you're developing a property. And when you go into that anyway, you do have to know who your market is going to be. So you really should start learning who they are as people, and what their stories are. And then you can create that brand identity along with the actual building itself and the location. So,
Lovely. Well, thanks, Aisha. And if people want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about what you do, what should they do? Where can they find you on the web or email?
Yep, they can find me at studiorebrand.com or Aisha at studiorebrand.com. That's my email address. You can pop one down there, or if you do need to give a call through, it's 0414 862 940. But otherwise, Studio Rebrand has a lot of resources that we're currently building up and putting in there, even just to give you an outline of where you want to go if you're a developer, if you want to go into property development, or if there is a certain way that you'd like to market your particular property. Just there's free resources there. You can learn yourself where you're at and make the decisions that you need to make for your particular property and for where you want to take it as goals.
Great. Well, it sounds like there's a few options there. Is there one in particular that if I'm thinking we might be going to do a development soon, I would like to contact you early on, what would be the best thing to start with there?
Well, there's a few different resources, 7 mistakes that you can make when you're looking at your brand identity for your property, and 7 problems that can sort of come up when you don't have your ducks in the row. There's some information there. It's also a brand audit that we're developing at the moment, and it's allowing you to go, it's a free program that we're just developing. You can go in and just look at different aspects and elements of your property offering and how it feels, the story that you'd like to tell, particular aspects that really come up and jump up at you about your particular property, and it'll just generate a report for you on the direction that you should take. And this really, really helps that you can take that to a designer and say, look, this is how we feel about our property. This is the things which are, you know, wonderful about the particular location, and it just gives you a list of all the amazing things that you've got. It allows you to understand where you're going with your brand and how you're going to take it to the next level, which is going to be the next level of getting your business out there with your property faster, on time, and with quality results, because that's what the real core of it is about. So it's quality for everyone.
Fantastic, Aisha. That's great. So once again, you can contact Aisha at her website, studiorebrand.com, and it's Aisha, A-I-S-H-A, at studiorebrand.com. Thanks again for talking. Always lovely to speak to you, and look forward to catching up another time, learning more about how people can build their brand.
Thank you so much, Dallas. You've been wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect.